Hey, welcome to our podcast, Project Brightside, where we always look on the bright side, even when things are looking pretty dark. I'm Richard Brito,
And I'm Shelby Flohr.
and we're your host for today's episode. Topics of discussion for our podcast includes society and culture, education, and TV and film. Each episode will have an interview of a guest speaker followed by a Bright Talk segment where we discuss a complicated topic in hopes of shining light on it.
For today's episode, we'll be interviewing our Chief Creative Officer, Luke Reosti. With that said, let's get started. Hi, Luke. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Shelby. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah,
Hi,
thanks for having
baby.
me today. Hi. Good to talk to you again so soon.
So I guess to kick us off, the first question we like to ask is just who are you?
I would first like to start off by saying that I am currently in my MBA program at Florida International University. I recently graduated from Florida State University with a digital media production degree, and right now I am just trying to make my space in the media production industry and figure out where I fit in the whole thing. So I guess you could say that I'm like in the early stages of my career right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. It seems like you've already accomplished a lot already, even in, as you're calling it, the early stages. So that's great.
So,
I
what
Yeah.
are
guess,
exactly? Oh, sorry. I
oh,
was just
go
gonna
ahead,
ask.
Richard. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, like, what are some specifics of like who Luke Reosti is? Give us some descriptors.
So I would definitely say that I am someone who would have previously identified as an extrovert, but I think over the years and over the recent times, I've definitely become more of a thoughtful introvert and kind of devoted myself to, uh, I guess, trying to have more understanding of things before I speak and speak on things and interact with things around me in life, just so I can be like deliberate and informed.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially like living with you, cohabitating with you, definitely agree with that. And it's great. It's a kind of like a balance of it because you were very extroverted and then you sort of like switched into introvert, but you try to balance between the two.
Well,
Um,
COVID changed a lot for me just because of having to go from being in such like a high pace environment at FSU to following all of the self-isolating protocols. I think I just kind of like formed in that new habit. But I like it. Like I enjoy my alone time. So I've had to definitely kind of force myself to get out and connect with people.
that's
Yeah.
awesome, babe.
I think both, like you were saying, being extroverted or introverted is great, but I think COVID definitely forced a lot of us who were previously uncomfortable with like spending time with ourselves to actually grow in being able to do that and being able to kind of meditate and reflect and be more introspective. So I definitely resonate with that as well.
Well, I also realized through the pandemic, through kind of the practices that you just mentioned, a lot about myself, and one of that is being that I'm just a very anxious person,
Yeah.
and that I think a lot of my socialization was based in just a distraction of not wanting to kind of like be alone with my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the recent years, I've just kind of had to just confront like a lot of issues within myself. I think it's definitely given me perspective about what's important in my life. Just been kind of a transition.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I loved what you mentioned about kind of being intentional with your thoughts and your actions. So that's something that I've been trying to incorporate as well. I guess the next question for us, and we're kind of leading into that already, is what are 3 to 7 core values that really describe who you are?
I would definitely say that my first would be compassion, especially just because I feel like if you're basing all of your like decisions and actions with compassion, you can go forward confidently knowing that as long as your intention is pure, then like you can confront your mistakes like more head on, knowing that you don't need to like be ashamed of them.
Yeah.
So I feel like going into a place with compassion also allows for more of accountability as a leader in like a
Mm,
weird way,
absolutely.
which is actually my second one, accountability. Um, and I definitely think that accountability is one of the main things that I look for in a person, just because I feel like there are so many opportunities to shirk responsibility, whether
Yeah.
that be professionally or personally. And I feel like, just watching someone kind of like be lazy at work, you're kind of like, like, I wonder what other aspects of life that could lead off into. And luckily, Richard has been the shining opposite of that in every way. He's you the most accountable person I've ever met in my life, like almost to a
Oh.
fault, you know?
Oh.
So he's been a breath of fresh air in that aspect. Um, and then I would say that my third, and I'll just do three because I'm kind of getting into them, but would be fairness, just because there's a lot of inequity in the world, and I think that going through every aspect of life and every aspect of your decision making and ethics when it comes to like government and voting and stuff should always become coming from a place of fairness.
Mm.
And you know, I think that also translates to just the little parts of life as well.
Knowing you like who you are really well, I would say that you're a very like committed person and you value integrity. You're also like very grateful for the like how far you've come and the people around you and your friends and family.
I think that also like that mindset of being grateful for the little things is really helpful, at least for me, like in my, I don't know, just like inner thoughts as well, and kind of pushing me to be more motivated. I think a positive outlook helps with that a lot of times.
I agree.
Thank you, Luke, so much for kind of going through those attributes that really describe who you are. And you kind of alluded to this already in the first question, but wanted to ask you specifically, what do you really aspire to do in life?
I would definitely say that my goal at this point is to subvert my own expectations of my life. I realized that growing up that I definitely saw how hard it was to really establish a good general foundation for oneself financially. So when you see like the real world, like hard knocks of life happen to the people around you, it could kind of shake up your morale as a young person. And so by the time I was hitting the pandemic, I started to find myself really shooting low. And that was partly due to just like my own personal mental health problems and other things I was going through. And so right now, I've already surpassed my own expectations. And with Richard's attitude, he's like shockingly optimistic, I would say. Like he has some of the like brightest dreams, and I really find it inspiring. And
You're so
it has
sweet.
taught me it changed my self trajectory to aim bigger. Um,
Oh,
and so now I'm okay diluting myself a little bit. Like, I feel like 2 years ago, I would have criticized myself in some of the thought processes that I'm having now of dreaming. And I feel like that also really shows a lot of growth on my part because I'm looking back and I'm like, shut up. Like, like, what's wrong with like having aspirations, you know?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's all about transforming like you've sort of not sort of you've really picked up on this on transforming the negative self-talk into positive self-talk, which I bring up all the time because I've had to do it. Because if you beat yourself up every day, you're outwardly going to portray something that is not your best version. So if you treat yourself better, you're going to like feel better. And if you feel better, you're going to portray yourself as a light person. So if you change the little things, like how you speak to yourself inside your head, it could go a long way. And you've really done that. Like that's why I've seen like so much transformation. Like, and sometimes you could provide people with the tools, but they got to do the work, and you've put in the work. So I'm really proud of you, babe.
I appreciate that.
So I'm curious with this next question, what does your leadership experience consist of? I want to see what like really stood out for you in terms of like what you're proud of being a leader for.
Definitely. So I'm really proud of the expertise that I've cultivated for myself. I am currently the Chief Creative Officer for the Brightside production, and in my day job, I am the Chief Creative Director for another media content firm called Lotus Flower Media. And I'm constantly guiding the creative direction for different projects around me with throughout a multitude of different professional areas. But it all kind of comes back to the visual creation. And this is kind of something that I supplement from a lot of professionals who are lacking visual creativity. I work with like a lot of engineers and research driven people who are just focused on having a message that they're desperate to connect with someone. And so my job, and I feel like is my goal in life, is to help people facilitate important messages and data and projects and dissertations or whatever into the public in positive ways, just so we can all kind of benefit as a collective from this information because it's all around us. Your people are going to college every day and learning things and making their own expertises, and you know, it could be other people's job to share those.
Nice, nice. I think you said that perfectly. And I was gushing, like totally. You're so cute. Next question. What would you say your leadership philosophy and style is?
I definitely enjoy preferably a more hands-off approach, but that's kind of a more selfish, I think, preference. I function more practically with a divide and conquer method. Being able to have an idea of how the work is going to flow from one department to another and kind of exchange oneself and the flow of information is going to be the one thing that I'm okay with someone meddling in. Just because I know that working with a lot of different departments and corporate settings, people can sometimes get lost in terms of getting their ideas across about something that we are working on collectively.
Hmm.
And so if we have a leader who is really good at like connecting those areas, I think that that's more ideal than someone who is really getting into the nitty gritty of your specific task,
I
you know,
agree.
because then that kind of just becomes a little bit like
Yeah.
a helicopter boss.
Micromanagement. Yeah, totally. I agree with you. And that's a part of learning as a leader, um, balancing what other people have to do and what you have to do and not overstepping those boundaries and collectively working. It's forming collaboration. So I agree with what you said, babe. Or Luke.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah, excuse
Sure.
me.
sorry. I'm
That's
so
great.
sorry.
No, you guys are so cute. I was gonna say, I think that also takes a lot of like knowledge and trust of your team to be able to like let people kind of do their own thing and you do your own thing. So I think that's great that you know your team so well.
That's also come from a place of being kind of one of the only creative professionals on a team of other really established professionals in their field. For example, I'm working on a project right now where one of the people who is a consultant on the project is the inventor of the product that we're selling, and so
Oh,
he's
wow.
very established in his field, like very like high profile. They also don't really know necessarily how to operate, graphic design things, which is fine because that's not their job. Their job is to be a proficient person in their field of the product that they're distributing,
That makes
you
sense.
know? So like I've kind of found myself sometimes being like, they're like, does this look good? Can you finalize this? And so for the first time in my life, I'm in a place where I don't have anyone above me to be like, is this flawless? I am
Mm,
like, I'm looking at someone who is going to take this product and mass produce it, and I am the
sure.
last line of defense visually. And that terrifies me in some ways, but it also excites me because I feel like I have earned their professional trust.
Absolutely. That sounds like a very important role. Also, I just kept thinking of Shark Tank when you're
Yes, that's
is
exactly
the
what
person somebody from Shark Tank? Let's be
I,
honest.
sorry, I'm speaking very vaguely just because
yes, you can't
it's
say
in the it's
specifics.
in the early
No, no, I
developments,
like it.
and yeah, so there's some
No,
secrecy
I
and
appreciate it.
confidentiality things. But I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah,
I'm
no, but that was
from
super,
the
super
medical
good.
field, so I don't know real people jobs. So I was like, this sounds like Shark Tank to me. Yeah.
Well, I
So,
go ahead,
uh-huh.
Richard.
Go, no, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I almost passively did my MBA, so then when I find myself operating a little bit more on like the wavelength of the business people that I'm working with, I surprise myself and I'm like, oh, I'm actually learning something in this program
There
that
you go.
it takes up a lot of my time and energy, so I'm actually kind of
You
glad.
finished
So
this upcoming May, so
I
that's
do,
huge.
I do.
You're gonna be a whole master of business administration. That's like mind
Hmm.
blowing because that's something that I considered once, and I was like, that's a little too specific in math and programming or
I got
Excel.
away with surprisingly little math. For well, I had to do math, but it wasn't harder as difficult math as it could have been. Just because there's many different selections and electives that you get to choose. So
Cool.
Yeah, I have not been able to run away from math. I'm still like, I'm gonna take biostats 2. That's kind of a beast. I think this coming August of 2024,
yeah,
and that's it. It's a wrap. But I am so not looking forward to any more math after that.
yeah. I
Aside from
still had to
like,
take accounting, so that was pretty
oh,
bad.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're.
that sounds
Woo.
very hard.
But you got it, babe. You're gonna graduate, or Luke.
Great.
Sorry, you got it,
See, but
Luke.
but this is an MBA complaining to like a literal MD, so I can't
Whatever.
I can't complain too
Whatever.
hard.
It's all fine. No, everybody, I suck at math, so I feel like the MBA sounds very hard.
No, honestly, the MBA will teach you math, but it'll teach you math through Excel, which
Okay.
it's
That's
actually
helpful.
satisfying math to do.
So thank you so much for going over that. So I do want to ask you the next question. What would you say are some keys to success?
So I definitely would have to say that the keys to success right now would be to avoid being complacent. I definitely noticed that a lot of people around me were waiting for a certain period of their life in order to permit the beginning of their dreams or aspirations. And that person, I guess, mainly was myself. I should
Mm.
say, uh, and the people around
Me
me,
too at one point.
just because you know there's a perceived barrier, as Richard likes to say. You can if you need to make it happen, you will make it happen. And that definitely has led to like a shift of priorities in my life, which has ended up, I guess, how I ended up in an MBA. Started in a history major and was going to be a lawyer, and then that whole thing turned into digital media production. So I guess you could say it started there. But I've
That
definitely been more satisfied in these decisions recently than I have been in some of the longer term goals I had had previously in my life.
and what's really magical about what you just said is that we met right around like where that transition was happening. So 2019, you had like that embodiment of like, oh, you wanted to be a lawyer and you were sort of like shedding those layers off of yourself and transitioning to actually following your dreams. And witnessing how creative you are has like really inspired me to reflect on like what really matters to me. And
Hmm.
because you're so talented in something that I want to do, it inspires me to try to achieve your level. So it it makes me realize, oh, I've been focusing on my left side of my brain. I need to focus more on my right because that's something that I've always like thought as like creativity and like music and art as this form of like self-actualization and a privilege that not many people could achieve. Not saying that you haven't gone through stuff because you have, but you've like been able to keep that core and focus on that and your artistry, and it really does radiate. So that's something that I really admire from you. Um, so you are a successful leader in the sense of not really being hands-on in micromanaging people that you oversee. So what exactly are some challenges that you've faced in the past as a leader?
I would definitely have to just say that my anxiety has been my number one obstacle in life in most facets. And so being a leader has definitely not been an exception to that. And so that has been something that I've had to put a lot of deliberate effort into controlling. And when I started out in my initial leadership positions, I definitely noticed that my anxiety was kind of steering the wheel in a lot of ways. Um, and so I was preemptively making decisions when it wasn't necessarily echoing the actuality of what was happening around me. So I definitely think, just being a listener and just being like anticipating what's going to happen, but also just like not creating more problems
Hmm.
in that role um can be something that is really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
No, I think those were really good points. And I guess another question for you, which we kind of already started, and you mentioned some of the anxieties that, go hand in hand with important positions. What do you think the costs are of assuming a leadership role?
So the cost of assuming a leadership role is being responsible to the people that you're leading.
Hmm.
I was talking with Richard the other day, and I had mentioned to him that I think that the number one epidemic in leadership is people wanting the title and the benefit that comes with a position, but not being able to take the responsibility that comes with that role.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I have, trust me, I have perpetrated this. I have been someone who has seen a role as a means to an end. And that was part of something that I had to deconstruct about myself. And now I'm like proud to say that what I have chosen to focus on in my life, I give my full energy. And, that has required sacrifice and shift and change. Um, but you know, it has also led to a lot more joy in my life because I have worked myself into working on things that I want to be working on. Like back to intention is what we had talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
that's like, the main way to subvert the cost.
Yeah, I
That's
love how you took accountability or responsibility as something that is a cost, and that's true to kind of a skill or a positive as well. So that was great.
yeah, and you also went into like turning a negative into a positive, and you went into our next question, which is what are the benefits of assuming a leadership role?
Oh, well, that's funny because my answer would be, I guess, a completely different end of the spectrum of leadership, which is the actual product that you're delivering with what, or product or service or whatever you're leading, movement you're creating. And it's really to bring that vision that you have to life. I have definitely been working under people my whole life to get to the places where I can make my own visions come to life. And I definitely anticipate working with other people to bring their visions to life. And I'm totally okay with that because there are so many like beneficial aspects to that as well. You can find joy in taking a group of people and leading them to bring your vision to life when necessary.
Yeah,
Now, I'm
awesome.
not the type of person who likes to lead for the sake of leadership, which is something that I learned that I was doing previously, which is why I found myself like not happy in those leadership roles.
Hmm.
So also like learning to say no and learning to pass that baton to someone else more like qualified and equipped to take on that attention that a leadership role needs is also something that is like another thing people I think should, take more seriously.
Yeah, the experience you gain from it, totally like does you do take it with you, and it totally does transform you, because it's something that you could always reflect back on and know that you have an experience with. So, what advice would you offer to others that are seeking to develop their leadership potential?
I would definitely suggest that you shouldn't be afraid to question something, uh, especially from another leader, especially from a colleague. And that doesn't have to necessarily be from a place of like animosity. Sometimes I simply like play the contrarian role to myself by myself, just to think about both ends of that spectrum. And so sometimes when you're in a group setting, this is something like we were just talking about in my MBA class. Like if there's not a lot of input from the outside world, then you can create a system of groupthink within the employees.
Hmm.
And so whether that just be a lot people who are for example, all like research students at FSU, like they might not think about another aspect of research outside of FSU that could also be beneficial, and that is just an aspect of research that they had completely missed due to their group think.
Um, People mostly take everything at face value. Like what they see, they have these like assumptions, and they take that face value of those assumptions. And sometimes questioning, like what's really been being done is, it goes into evaluation. A lot of the stuff, because I have like glanced over like what you're learning and whatnot, and sometimes it's very similar to what I'm learning, but different. It's a different field. So you're looking at it from a different perspective, but it's very valuable because it goes hand in hand with evaluation. And right now I'm learning about evaluation, but you, with business administration, it really does have a lot of evaluation coded within it, but you don't really like address it. So with the public health sector, the same thing can be done because public health and health itself, like it's viewed as a business, sadly, in the society. Not every country has, free healthcare. And even then, there are, networking and trades that have to go on, that not have to go on, but do occur for society to function as a system. Um, and it's really interesting, like hearing what you've learned and then comparing it to what I've learned and comparing it to what Shelby's learned. There are connectors, and there's been like, I think there was a post or some article that I read, that says that most of the discoveries that are really like impactful for society come from a totally different field that another field has been trying to like figure out for a long time. So
That's
it's
funny.
yeah, it's the interconnectedness, the intersectionality of it. That's a wrap for our interview. So now we could go ahead and go into our Bright Talk segment. All right. So, for our next segment, Bright Talk, where we discuss complicated topics in hopes of shining light on the matter, this week we will be discussing what is propaganda. So, Luke, what is propaganda?
So propaganda is basically going to be any sort of messaging that you're getting from somebody that's intentionally based in something misleading. You're going to have propaganda, for example, on Twitter. Let's say that somebody's making a pretty logical argument. That argument could make sense at first glance, but if you really look at the context of the story, when you're looking at how it's framed, a lot of the times, most of it is appealing to the specific emotional or prejudice-based biases of someone to convey sort of an ulterior motive with this actual true event. So propaganda is anything from stories like these to like media campaigns of just like mass messaging to just a movie, things happening in movies that uh, aren't necessarily naturally happening in real life to influence how people do act in real life. So, if you want to look at it from a really technical perspective, propaganda is going to be the deliberate expressions of actions by groups of people to influence the actions of other groups of people for predetermined ends through means of psychological manipulation. Propaganda's main three tenets of it are going to be based in emotions, prejudices, and bias rather than rational arguments, which makes it mostly dangerous. It can also create a false sense of consensus among the public by suppressing dissenting voices or alternative perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are some really great points. Now that you've been able to share, what propaganda is and why it might be important, how do we identify propaganda?
So propaganda is not a new not so propaganda is not a new phenomenon. Various political, religious, and social movements have used it throughout history to promote all different types of agendas and interests. But the hard part nowadays is that we have something that we didn't have back then called mass media, social media, all of these, the internet, for example. These aspects of life nowadays have amplified media consumption to a point where it is basically impossible to differentiate real information from false information to somebody who's not necessarily media literate.
Yeah, that is true. At first glance, someone could really, even people that are media trained, at first glance, they could believe something that they see. And what specifics can people do to determine the difference between propaganda and not?
So I definitely for myself will go and look at the source that I'm reading and try and think of who is this story coming from? What different types of motivations could they have? What kind of people own the company? What kind of people are tied to the company that it's owned? And what other current events are happening within the world that might be affecting uh, the ethics of this product?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are some really good points you have there. One question I guess I had is, with everything that we're talking about right now in terms of propaganda, how do you feel like this is applied to your life and your experience?
A lot of the propaganda directed toward people like me is definitely going to be based in the military. You're going to find propaganda for the military in almost everything, but the most iconic thing that has kind of lasted throughout history is Uncle Sam as a character and in his images where he's pointing at you and the iconic poster. Um, but I think that that kind of has grown into this mass militarization of propaganda for the military, you could say. And so when I was in high school, I was having like army recruiters coming and talking to me. I was having people getting my phone numbers to text me about recruiting from other club organizations that had nothing to do with it. And through all of this, I was a teenage boy playing first-person shooter games, uh, and literally like playing war. And looking back, I'm just I can see the how as a society we're not gonna find ourselves around those types of games and movies and stuff, which I think we can all enjoy in some aspects. But I think it's important to be really cognizant of the media that you're consuming. So whether or not you're supporting the messaging that it's getting across, being conscious of the messaging that it is trying to articulate to you has power within itself.
Great points. So, how do we combat or protect ourselves from these narratives that have these possible ulterior motives?
So it's going to be crucial to critically evaluate propaganda by considering the source, the purpose, and the evidence and the logic of the messaging. Comparing the sources of the information and seeking out reliable and independent sources that can provide facts and analysis is also really helpful. But being aware of one's own biases and assumptions and questioning them when faced with propaganda is essential to avoid being a victim of misinformation. False information can manipulate relationships and create isolation both online and offline. This phenomenon is known as participatory propaganda. It not only persuades users to interpret events through a particular lens, but it also divides people from their friends and family, leaving individuals feeling isolated.
Yeah, so just drawing on some personal experiences, especially with election year 2024, we are all going to be facing a lot of propaganda. So it's very important for us to really identify that propaganda and evaluate it, where the source is, uh, the purpose, the evidence, the logic of the message, and really like internalize like what you're reading and identify whether or not that's true or not, and do some research and inform yourself because there's a lot of misinformation going out there right now, and we've had evidence that there has been tactics to misinform us Americans during times of election. So I think it's very crucial that this time around we don't fall for it, um, and we really educate ourselves. All right. Thank you so much for such an insightful interview and a Bright Talk segment. It was great having you on, babe.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, for our next episode, we will be interviewing our project manager, Sophia Paez, also known as Soph, and having a Bright Talk segment with her. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.
Episode 3 was executive produced by Richard Brito, Shelby Flohr, Luke Reosti, Jake Reosti, Andres Ilarana, Zoe Rushetsky, John Scrivenich, and Sophia Paez. Music by Jake Reosti. Edited by Luke Reosti and Richard Brito.